Thanks, Keith, for the introduction, although I confess that I'm a little disappointed that I needed one. Thanks to USGIF. You know, this is the most amazing collection of talent and possibility that I think exists in the community. I'm absolutely delighted to be a part of you. Speaking of family, let's see if we can. This is my firstborn's firstborn. She had the wisdom to arrive 3 weeks early so that she and I would be in Texas at the same time. This is Harper Grace Gordon. I got to see her yesterday. And I'm sorry I missed the dinner and events yesterday, but maybe you'll forgive me. Listen, y'all, I got a chance to hold this new life too. And I decided it was my job to give her just a little perspective about the world she's entering, to offer some advice about how she might navigate her way through her upcoming adventure, and to tell her what we will need from her. After all, that's what matriarchs do. And after I got through all this, she fell asleep. But I'm going to tell you what I said to her. It turns out that it's the same guidance I want to give to you. And if you'll be like little Harper and not fall asleep till the end, we'll be having a good day. Here's what I said. I said, the world is doing what it periodically does. It's changing. And the change we're experiencing right now is a big one. It's exciting. It's scary for some, but not for you, Harper. For you see the world as it is. You were made for this moment. Now you will need to develop a craft, something that you're really good at, something that you can offer for the cause. And just when you get good at it, you're going to have to develop it anew. You see, the craft is not the point of your endeavor. Your craft is merely the vehicle for your outcome. Harper, you have a responsibility to help your fellow humans achieve their aims, inform their decisions. You want to share with them what you see and what you understand. And they will need things from you. And actually, Harper, what they need from you will be more important than what you prefer to do. I want you to know that you're not alone. You're a part of something bigger. You need to have an aim point, though, but it's the implementation that counts, and that implementation depends on the environment in which you find yourself, so never hold tight to that implementation. And finally, my little one, you are a woman in the arena. Others will describe what ought to be done. You will be the one that leads and gets on with the doing. So let me put it in context for you. Because not only am I the new matriarch of my little family, from my position as the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, I consider myself the matriarch of our big family. This is a brave new world. It is different from any other time I've seen, once again. Now, if you track the arc of our intelligence community from our origins in 1947, we are at a third inflection point where everything changes. The Cold War is where we started, when governments held the information, when we developed systems to go after that information in their holdings, and when our customers were largely policymakers and warfighters, and perhaps a few allies. That approach carried us through the fall of the Berlin War, and it was that expertise and experience that allowed us to understand newly proliferant nations. 9/11 was another inflection, and it forced a change in the way we prosecute our craft because the information was no longer held by governments, it was increasingly held by individuals. And we needed to find a way to get to their information. And the age of cyber was born that allowed us to see places that we hadn't seen before, to track activity in ways that we hadn't had to track it before. And yes, warfighters and policymakers and allies were our consumers, but there were a new set of partners in state and local governments because the threats were being manifest there. And we needed to find ways to work with foreign partners who weren't necessarily the beneficiary of long-standing relationships because we needed each other in this collective quest. And we find ourselves again at a point where we have to reimagine how this magical mission of intelligence is going to be effective, because this is a world that is where the threats are to and through information. It is a world of ubiquitous technology, of digital connectedness, and of data abundance. And those three things are so different and will challenge so many things that we thought that I want you to wrap your head around what they mean. Ubiquitous technology means that every technology is going to be available to everyone, and the one that can put it to clever use faster is the one who's going to win. And what that means is people who are not bound by an installed base are going to get to solutions and advantage much easier than those of us who are. Digital connectedness completely changes the aspiration and the reach and the modality of our competitors and adversaries. Not only does it allow information to whip around and change how we process knowledge, but it crosses boundaries that we constructed because we believed in them, but those boundaries are now transparent to others and impede us. And this data abundance thing is both bane and boon. Bane because if we can't figure out how to use it, we won't be able to know the truth or see beyond the horizon or allow our decision makers to act before events dictate. Boon because if we do, it will allow us to see the life and breadth and pattern of the world in ways that no others can. This is not your mother's national security, where the threat surface now is largely outside the government. And the people who are having to make decisions about national security are not the people who were necessarily believing they had to make that decision before. And the question the government has is, how do we provide them with the wisdom and insight that had been the wisdom and insight we provided to only governmental entities, so that the private sector and the public, those people who are being affected by the threats and competition, have the wherewithal and the knowledge to make decisions for the collective in a way that they never thought they needed to. Now, my career as an innovator tells me a couple things about this moment. That in order to innovate, you have to let go of some fixed points. Things that you always believed to be true, because you cannot keep everything fixed and still get someplace else. When we formed In-Q-Tel, the thing we let go was this notion that you could give the private sector our biggest challenges and have them make decisions about how to prosecute it. We're at that kind of moment. The other lesson of innovation is that you have to account for the rules that governed your actions in the past, but you need not implement them in the same way you did. Now, this is a daunting picture, but you know what? Harper wasn't daunted, and neither should you be, because we've been here before, and in fact, the GEOINT community has been here before and has carried the day, and I believe that we still are the ones that will. There's a particular magic in GEOINT. It provides content and context, the certainty of an image and the understanding that comes with putting something in the framework of time and space. It is the foundation of much of what we do as Intel profession. It's the data and the products and the services that describe the Earth's physical and cultural characteristics, the topography, the elevation, the imagery, the geodesy, the names, the physical boundaries, the human geography, Liz Lyon, the environmental conditions that allow us to understand human activity and the forces that act on it. This is a community that has a history of solving challenges that we had no idea how to challenge and solve. From the galactic radiation and background satellite or GRAB in 1960 through Corona and Oxcart, to the systems we fly today that are able to understand the phenomenology at a level of granularity that will provide the clarity that we need. And GA as an agency, from my perspective, is the first of our agencies to imagine a different future than the one that they had been affecting. They were the first to embrace what was happening commercially and in the public sector, the first to imagine what could be done with data, the first to build their work to serve a different set of customers, to put their product out in the open so it could be used. And GEOINT has been a first mover on augmenting intelligence with machines. The first to recognize that we weren't looking at all that we needed to, that our humans were being used on tasks that they didn't need to be used on, and that if we were going to put everything together, we had to have partners who were machines, not just humans who worked harder. Now, make no mistake, the intelligence community as a whole is better than we've ever been. I say it with absolute certainty, and this is true for GEOINT as well. We are, as a collective, we're faster, we're more integrated, we're more transparent, and we're more diverse. Our mission since '47 was to know the truth. We're working hard to be able to know a truth in a world where that truth is buried in a massive noise that looks like data. We have an ability to imagine and create technological marvels. Almost since the very beginning of our intelligence community, we have been allowed to see beyond our eyesight, hear beyond the world's ears, and know the world beyond arm's reach. And we can't ever lose our drive to do this. Our community has to meet this inflection point, no matter how good we are, as we have met every point in history, by adjusting what we do to meet the environment and the world situation in which we find ourselves, never forgetting our why and never getting locked into our how. See, that's the beauty of the new National Intelligence Strategy. If you look at it, it is an outcome-focused document, and it's simple. And it talks about premises of integration and innovation and partnership and transparency, not locked into the way we've done that, but imperatives that we must achieve differently. And for as good as we are, though, the problems of our customers and consumers are going to require us to do more, to go further, to cross more boundaries, to put more together. We're going to have to adjust our tradecraft to produce intelligence for people who want to do, not just people who want to know. In a brief digression, I had the good fortune of talking to the Senate Youth Forum, which are 2 high school students from every state in the United States. If you want to have hope for the future, be around our future, and they will inspire. But I was taking questions and answers. In the back of the room, a hand was raised, and I called on the young lady, and she said, "Hi, Director Gordon, this is Becky. I'm from North Dakota. I'd like you to know your thoughts on 38 North's study using digital globe imagery of the activity going on at Yangsan. And does it change our assessment of the North Korean capability, and how is that going to influence our approach to denuclearization?" That's what we used to do. That's now what the world does. And that's okay, but if we stay in the place that thinking our whole craft is about knowledge and not about use, we'll miss the joy of the moment that we have. We're going to have to remember that each of our individual crafts, all the ents aren't the be-all and end-all. You are not in the GEOINT business. You're in the national security business. Your what is GEOINT, but your why is national security. And if you sat where I sat, if you were graced with the position that I am, you would hear the questions that are being asked of us now. How in a world where weapons are sensors, are we possibly going to inform them in a time frame that makes sense for their action? It is awesome that we think about tasking, collection, production, and distribution. That is not going to work. And we're not going to be able to achieve the timeframes we need by throwing more metal up into the air to have more data. It's going to be how do we put it together to have those timeframes. End to end is the game, and you're a part of it, but you're not all of it. Who's going to put it together if you don't understand that? Our military consumers want to know about pattern of life, how forces are going to act in an information age, how they're going to use information, about new weapon systems, and how those deployments and what strategy they are. And how do we see that and put that together? And it isn't just about cop and sip. It's about being able to see activity to infer intent and approach, and be able to provide it in a way that our warfighters can use anew. How are we going to understand risk in a 5G world? How are we going to see what the effect of choices about communication security and reliability are going to mean for how we have to act in the future? What about understanding threats to society that fall outside our typical bounds? How do we understand the threats that human-imposed disasters and migration cause? And what are we going to do to be able to talk about the national security aspects of that when the limits of our control have typically been all outside the United States, but these threats are manifest in different places? And how are we going to help expose the modalities of the new terrorist threat that is less based on geography than it is on capability and movement? Each of these problems I described has a GEOINT component, and not a single one of them can be solved by GEOINT. And my admonishment to you, my imploring to you, is that it can't be someone else's responsibility to put it together. It has to be the responsibility of all of us who have crafts to know why we're using them and get us there. So this is my let's get on with it portion of the program. Have you noticed that we're way more comfortable with problem identifying than problem solving? Even for the rock stars in this room. So let me challenge you with a few areas that I think we need to move as a group. We need to lean forward with high-risk, high-reward research, even if the commercial application isn't yet evident. I am the happy beneficiary of remarkable investment by the private sector, but I don't think that's going to be enough. So what is that the government's going to lean forward with? For those of you who are developers, eyesight is what the intelligence community has decided on as its vehicle for integration. If your solution doesn't work with it, you're not on Team National Security. And if we're doing it wrong, then you need to tell us what we need to do to make it right. But having something that doesn't work won't work. We need to deliver at scale. There are so many exciting capabilities that we introduce, but if we can't do them at scale, they're using up resources that I will need later to solve the problems. I need you to adhere to data standards. We are doing such great work with the Department of Defense, but I need everyone to get on board because it doesn't matter if we collect it if we can't use it. And everyone needs to have responsibility, not just act on data as they prefer. You need to protect your supply chain and our data. This is a big old goofy world. We require the openness to have the capability we need, but we need the assurance to be able to provide the wisdom that is our responsibility. We need to attract, retain, develop the best talent. And we need to stop thinking about our talent pools as only ours, or careers as only in one place. We have enough talent, but each of us can't hold it as though it's only our own. We need to be able to use all available data. Now, this is really hard for us to say because in the intelligence community and the government, because intelligence is not about opinion. It's about being able to deal certainly with uncertain information. But if I only know how to deal with the data that I collect or I curate, I don't know that I'm going to be able to get to the world. So help us figure out how we're going to use all the data, or rather all the data that matters. We're going to have to produce unclassified assessments that have standing because those people that are making decisions are not all in skiffs. We're going to have to learn how to share risks with our partners before the threat manifests. It's easy once you know there's a problem. It's harder when you know that something is emergent. And this is true with terrorism. It's true with high-performance computing. It's true with activity. It's true with technology. How are we going to do that? We're going to have to develop new legal frameworks to allow engagement between the government and the private sector that builds on new shared responsibility. I've talked in this forum about acquisition reform, and I think we're doing some really remarkable things, but I still think we need frameworks to be able to deal with the spirit of volunteerism that I sense now that exists between us, but we don't have the framework to know how to use those volunteers. And we all need to stop doing things that are less important and actually commit to those are the things that we know are necessary. You know, teammates, in my very first town hall as the deputy director of NGA, which I still say, for this career CIA officer, was one of the most incredible gifts that I was given, that I had no right to, and I hope I've used the wisdom I got. But what I offered to that group on that very first day was my favorite quotations. It says, "Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate." I am more certain from my vantage point now that I was that this is the right guiding principle for the moment we're in and the task we have before us. Our task is to provide the timely, sure clarity, wisdom, and insight that our decision makers need in this fraught, complex, dynamic world. Now, in every story, there's a hero and a villain. Intelligence, especially GEOINT, has the chance to be the hero of our nation's and our partner's story. We have, you have, all the opportunity, all the piece parts, and all the wherewithal necessary to carry the day. So be up and doing as one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, I like that. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm kind of a big deal.
This is you engender this level of deference and respect. It's just
Yeah, nice. That was good. Hey, can I say one quick thing? Lisa Porter, I paid them more so that I got to speak in front of you because I didn't want to have to follow you. Okay.
Yeah.
Just saying, it's a financial world.
So Sue, this is a good one to start. It says, your success indicates an ability to make decisions, more good than bad. Can you share your process for the how and how you make business and personal decisions in an increasingly complex world?
Oh, that is a great question. I think it's 3-step. First is, I always consider what must be. I'm as stodgy as the best of them. I like what we've chosen to do in the past, as everyone else does, but I am more compelled with must be. So the first thing that I do in making a decision is what must happen, particularly if change is involved. So that's the first one. I take it out of the particular decision, and I try and think of what we're trying to accomplish, and that makes it clear for me. The second thing is every decision requires some sort of leap. Every decision is a creative act. It creates something that's never happened before, and so that's scary. Most people try and eliminate that leap by waiting for the world to turn. It's called turning a decision into an equation, and it sounds like, let me get more data, or let me spend a little bit more time. In order to be a great decision maker, you have to act when the moment demands, not necessarily when you're ready. So just get comfortable that every decision requires a leap. And then the last one is I always decide whether I can bear the consequence of being wrong. If I can bear the consequence of being wrong, let's go. If I can't bear the consequence of being wrong, then I have to do more work, but all of it is about where must we go? And am I comfortable enough to go ahead and move?
Can you describe how to successfully educate our agencies to treat data as an enterprise asset and to enable the unlocking of data potential?
Think of the questions you're being asked. I think the reason why we created chief data officers is because collectors or units were thinking that they owned the data. And as we grew and there were more people collecting data, there were more and more stovepipes. And the quality of our response was being governed by the small data set we have rather than the bigness of the data that were available to us. And this whole digital connectedness is affecting the intelligence community and the action community in ways that require us to be able to work together, not serially, but instantaneously. And the only way we're going to be able to do that if our data can work with other data. And as I mentioned in my talk, that's as tactile as a common operating picture that a battlefield commander needs to have, or an intelligence analyst that needs to be able to understand the activity that they're seeing in a greater context, not just in that moment, but what it means. So we have to. I think there's some really interesting questions about how we're going to implement that. Data standards are one thing. You're never going to be perfect on that. I think there are questions about going backwards in time, and can we condition all our old data and never get there, or do we simply have to start with every new piece of data we're collecting to make sure it's to a standard? I think there are really interesting questions about data assurance that we need to have. There are interesting questions about economy, so we're not all procuring the same thing. But we have to, because if you think about the question that our customers are asking from us, they typically aren't answered by a single data set.
And so you've touched on this a little bit, but it goes into sort of the full range of things that you can lead, things that the community can do to overcome legacy acquisition challenges as we forge forward into the future. What are some concrete steps someone sitting in the audience could take in their organization to help move things forward?
So, to all my private sector colleagues, you all benefit from the fact that I've spent my whole career in the government, and so I put disproportionate responsibility on the government side here. So I mentioned a couple of them. Number one is we have to be much more open-minded about where we need to go and think about our responsibility differently, and that will open up some trade space. The very particular aspect that we're trying to work on, and we still swing and miss sometimes on, is when we describe the problem we're trying to solve rather than the specification that you need to meet. So I just think all of us can help by understanding what we want to solve. The government can help itself by knowing more clearly and allowing more possibility in. I mentioned the legal framework. I think we are still bound by a system that was derived from the acquisition of M1 tanks. And I don't think that's necessarily the framework we need. But the reason why we need a framework is because there's a reason why the government's slow, and that it is sure and fair. And so we can't just be willy-nilly, but let's develop some frameworks that allow us to use the wisdom that is increasingly flowing between the two. And then the last one is, I really do think we're going to have to develop some new trade crafts that allow us to bridge the gap between where the decisions are being made and where intelligence prefers to operate. I love intelligence. I love my role in the administration because all we have to do is pursue the truth as hard as we can, and policy is affected by somebody else. I'm very comfortable with intelligence and policy, except when it comes to some interesting threats that we face rather on election security. Which part of it is understanding the threat and which part of it is implementation of the solution? Of 5G, which part of it is understanding the threat and which part of it is knowing what the next best decision that people should make? So I think there's some new trade crafts that we need to develop together. And I think that's where there's some really fertile ground that we can apply, because the government knows what it does, but the actors in this world also know what they do, and we've got to get that together.
So this one is something that some of us have been talking about this week in some conversations that I've been in, and that is thinking back to In-Q-Tel and the ground, the things that it set the stage for. Some of us are a little concerned that there's now, on top of the regular acquisition process, there's an innovation bureaucracy growing. And so you will not only have to figure out your way right through all the old challenges, but now the innovation culture begins to become a problem. When it's all well intended, but it starts to, starts to get complicated.
Yeah, so this is so, thank God we haven't solved all the challenges, because, what would we do? It's a conundrum, right? Because in order to innovate, you can't be required to solve all the problems. You can't need to know all the answers, because otherwise you won't take it on. You'll be forced into the same box. As a matter of fact, one of the answers I wish I've given you to the decision question is, I think when you're doing something really big, you have to allow it to stay messy for longer, right? Because really big ideas, if you force them to be neat, you tend to force them into what you understand. So I think this is a moment we're going to have to be messy a bit. Here's what I'm trying to do to help the innovation conundrum. And that is, I think within each of the agencies and organizations, we have a little bit of a problem where they do innovation, but their own processes are blockers. And so here you have the machine of any agency, and then you have them doing innovation, and the innovation spit out and it runs into a machine that's not well tuned. So at the OD&I and the D&I, we have one pretty useful authority, which is budget. And we're trying to change and have agencies build an innovation engine within their own agencies that are more accepting of those innovations just as part of a national course of business. And that's by saying, in your budgets, we only want to see 85% that's devoted to mission execution. We'd like to see another 10% that's about renewing your capability, and 5% that's new, trying to create inside of each of the agencies the responsibility themselves for having the environment and the processes by which the new becomes what they do. I think it's too hard to think of something new that's either funded externally, not part of the base, or funded externally outside of an agency. I got to get the work in the agencies themselves. So that's what we're trying.
So we had some wonderful young professionals on the stage yesterday morning to kick us off.
Not quite as young as my granddaughter.
Right. No, you win. Okay. So I'll concede.
Yeah, but she is pretty smart. She came early.
Truth.
Just saying. I think she's walking today.
Given that she's related to you, that's possible. And a geographer, and I'll paraphrase, said something to the effect of measuring crops overseas from remote sensing, what have you. It's not about area, it's about yield.
Right.
And I found that interesting. And so a question here goes to that idea, which is, how do you measure the output of the intelligence community? How do you measure the yield?
Yeah, I don't know. I should have listed that as a challenge, and then it would be on you. I don't know that I have a great answer. Except as what we want to be able to do is produce a picture of the world as it exists, as well as we can see. I think that's always been the case. I think the extent to which the nation has advantage, measured in all the dimensions that we have, I think is really the metric of the intelligence community, not just that we stay out of the news. But I think that's ultimately the metric. If you see the world now and you see all the decisions we're trying to make, as you see a move that I think is caused by this digital interconnectedness to a world that's much more or as much economically driven as it is on political military. And you see us wrestling with how do we understand multilateral effects, or how do we project the arrival of new weapon systems into use, taking account of high-performance computing, not just the Soviet production model, is really the metric of whether intelligence is providing what it needs to provide. The clarity with which we see what's going on and the ease with which we know what to do about it. And I don't think this is an easy world over which to have clarity. And I think those boundaries that are being crossed, just like in the intelligence community, yeah, Robert Cardillo always said this really interesting. He said there's a huge difference between NSA and NGA. NSA deals in ones and zeros, and NGA deals in zeros and ones. And this whole interconnectedness in the intelligence community is making the distinction between ints increasingly anachronistic. The same thing is true as all our government institutions. So there's good reason why it seems to be hard to both understand the world, because it's different, and the actions we need to take, because that means the organizations are different. But I think you'll know if we're successful if those things start being clearer about what we must do and easier to act on it for the purpose of advantage. And I think we're working through it.
So we know that we worked through trying to open up the intelligence community a little bit more over time, that NGA was sort of low-hanging fruit to do that. And I think what we're seeing now, perhaps, is some parts of the intelligence community getting less open, less public, appropriately, and still NGA almost has to bear the burden, if you will, of leading the charge on openness. So I find this question very interesting. When, in the context of a public-private partnership, how do we move beyond something that's simply transactional, as good as that may be, but something mutually beneficial, right? Can we share data back and forth? Can we help one another? So it is a partnership, not sort of a transaction.
Yeah, so I think we go back to two things that we've always used in order to have any kind of partnership. One is trust, and one is shared value proposition. So we know, over time, we have a lot of mechanisms by which we trust our closed system. We trust that people understand the limits of intelligence and how they might use it. And so we know how to do it. Man, we're dealing with a whole lot of people, not that are bad, but we don't know how to trust either side. And cyber is a great example where I think what we probably have to do from the government side is share more about the intent that we see, and from the private side, we need to share more about what's happening in your companies at the moment of attack so that we see it. Because we're getting pretty good at sharing data, but we're still limiting that to artifacts rather than that. So I think trust is one of those, and experience. And then the second is that shared value proposition. And so in a connected world, there's this pesky thing of sovereignty is really coming in much more into play, where partnership isn't, I need your help with what I'm doing. And that is that we need each other's help to get through our shared interest. And I think that's just something we need to do. So I would just say that work on those two things, how we trust each other and what our shared value proposition are the way forward. And I think there's some movements there. Like I said, I think cybersecurity is an area where we've gone a great distance. I think GEOINT is an area where we've gone a great distance. I think we're probably going to have to do even more. And when we figure out what we can share, we will also be very comfortable protecting the stuff that we can't.
So I think we could be at halftime of the Q&A period. So despite your charge to me, I'm going to throw you something softball-ish.
Are there any oranges coming out?
Yeah, that's not happening.
No?
Nobody did that.
Okay. Okay.
Describe a really good decision you made and a really regrettable decision you've made.
So a really, really good decision was the decision to, almost in my first day in this job, was to leave the decision that we'd made about how we were going to prosecute the Common Desktop, DTE. 5 years of really good hard work and a lot of good effort was something that theoretically could have worked. But it became apparent that it wasn't going to be able to. And probably the best decision that I can remember recently is deciding to walk away from something that we and I was personally invested in when it became apparent that it was not going to be the thing that took us to the future. And there were a lot of hard things about that. We had put hundreds of millions of dollars into it. I had humans that had devoted their energy to it. We had a solution that could work. And I had a predecessor who's the woman I most admire and respect, whose decision I was going to walk away from, and still it was the right thing to do. So I think that was, and it has allowed all the things that we're now doing with eyesight, which is actually bringing it to life for all the things that we're going to be able to do. So that was probably the best decision. It's hard for me to say that I regret any decision. I didn't tell you why leaders can be comfortable making decisions and taking risks, is that your women and men will never let you down. No, seriously. We have this wrong when we think that we're somehow protecting. No, they're protecting. If we set an aim point, they'll follow. So it's hard for me to think of a bad decision because all the bad ones my women and men have covered up from over the years. Plus, kind of look at where I landed. It would be cheap for me to be anything other than grateful.
So this is one that comes up and is whispered occasionally in these hallways, but you said no softballs, so
yeah, I mean,
that was the one.
How'd I do?
That was beautiful.
Yeah, all right.
The GEOINT mission will endure and proliferate to every activity in the IC. Do you see a time in the future that GEOINT tradecraft will be so fundamentally embedded as a skill that an standalone agency like NGA would no longer be needed?
I hope that it happens, that we continue to develop each of the individual expertises that we have in the intelligence community and use them effectively with each other and grow what it is that we're producing to be that which is rare rather than that which is commodity. I hope that happens, and that each one of our agencies will be different, and I suppose that it's also possible that some of our agencies might not need to be. And I don't think that's daunting or scary. I just think that's actually kind of a hope. But I don't think we have to start there, right? I don't think that's the right way to get to a future that is somehow organizationally different. I think the right way there is the one we're on right now, and kind of what I try to inspire you to think is, with all the opportunity that we have to be connected, with all the opportunity we have for our data to be shared, with all the opportunity that we have for machines to help us free up IQ points to understand how to apply that data to new problems, that will show us how organizationally we should structure. But if we commit to that, the other will become apparent. And so I choose not to spend a lot of time on that, because if we focus on what we must be, we will discover how we must organize.
So speaking of discovery,
Yes, sir.
have you discovered a way to help the often maligned middle management layer, right? Sometimes referred to as the concrete layer.
Yeah.
There is a need in our community sometimes to just constantly blame them for everything, right? They're not letting innovation come up, they're stopping things down. Have you found some things to help them move all of us forward?
Not yet. Okay, so first things first, that middle, that thing that we all shake our fists at, is the layer that does all the hard work. So let's not be confused about what's so hard about that. What's hard about it is that's a hard job. I worry that what's happened is that our mission expanded. We had to go into so many new areas that we sucked people up into leadership positions without the backbreaking physical labor of learning how to translate vision into action. And all that was required was their presence in a new space. And now we find ourselves in a world where we have to create, and I didn't train this set of leaders in terms of how to create. You know, when I was a GS10, my boss came to me and said, now, Sue, we need to find a new way to get data back in near real time from this place, cheaper than we did before. Go, and here's $50 million to figure it out. Go. Let's think about whether that would have happened today. I don't think so. But what it engendered in me was an understanding of how you take an undifferentiated problem, see the future, then know the things you have to solve, and then get on with it. I don't know that that's been our last 15 years. And so when I say this is a time of creation, I think we have to work with that middle in terms of how you lead creation. And while I'm on my middle, I want to talk about the people that own our processes. We deride them too. We are angry that our processes aren't keeping up with the world. But remember, the people who own our processes are the keepers of what makes us be trusted and to be worthy of the American people. And so how are we going to invest for the people that do security clearance and contracts and HR so that they know they don't have to protect us from random ideas that will not allow us to be confident, and how we invest in them and have them be the innovators as well and teach that. So I think it's incumbent upon us to do some reteaching about this for the people who will and have always carried us forward. I do believe that people at my level and others have got to have the confidence to push the problem down, because if those of us who are no longer in that foxhole are the ones that are thinking about the way out in a glib way, we won't do the work. So that frozen middle is where our hopes and dreams resolve. We need to invest in them anew because we stole some of their backbreaking years.
So there's a reason that there's no microphones in the audience, because we've all been subjected during events to soliloquies that were not questions.
Oh, different from the ones I just
But this is actually a statement, but
Okay.
it's wonderful, and since I have the prerogative, I think it's worth reading. Civil agencies have been able to benefit from the work and innovation the IC community has either funded or encouraged. This is a partnership that benefits taxpayers both in Homeland Security and in its function, it is able to do more with less funding. Please keep this partnership open and working.
Done.
That was easy, right? So this may be in a reaction or part of the comment that I made earlier about the threat of an innovation bureaucracy. Are there any plans to socialize innovation efforts, harmonize perhaps across the IC to mitigate duplication of effort and bring it all to a point, like perhaps a marketplace of innovation where it's all, where it's all aligned?
So to whoever asked that, thanks for the opportunity to talk about, there were so many things I wanted to talk with you about today. I just thought that 4 days wasn't enough for that. So one of the things that the intelligence community was in the throes of doing when I took this position over, and I hope I advanced, is this notion that we as a community needed to see our future, we needed to see the gaps, and we needed to decide on some things we needed to do together. EyeSight was really the first of those opportunities. We have 6 initiatives right now that the intelligence community is working. One of those is augmenting intelligence with machines. And that's exactly, it's intended to do exactly what you said. So the intelligence community is spending a ton of money on AI ML initiatives. But do any of us think that we have really achieved the vision that we have of using machines in an integrated way? And I didn't see that the community didn't see that we were going to get there. So this is an effort to set an aim, an endpoint, work with the community, see the activities that are going on, identify which activities are actually seminal and should be doubled down on, and which ones are redundant, and agencies can choose to not do that. So these initiatives on augmenting intelligence with machines, the right trusted agile workforce, a comprehensive cyber posture, an integrated data strategy, private sector partnerships, and agile acquisitions are actually the instantiation of our answer to that question, which is take all the activities that are going on and actually try and get the community somewhere at scale.
So this one goes to the idea of providing intelligence support to next generation hybrid warfare. We're watching the way that the Chinese and the Russians and others are approaching things. You touched on this a little bit. How do we provide to those who have to make decisions and take action the type of intelligence they need to be in that arena?
So I talked one part of it. I think we have to figure out how to share, not according to our desire, but according to their need. I think we need to do tradecraft, because I'm not sure the lexicon we use to talk to the government is the lexicon that the private sector needs in order to understand what they need to have. And I believe that we're going to have to think about how we produce unclassified reports withstanding. And when I say withstanding, something that we think is a product that has the same foundation of intelligence but is useful. The intelligence community is awesome at so many things. I'm sorry I'm such a unabashed advocate for our profession and our craft and our intent. But if the decision makers are outside the classified system, we have to give useful information to those decision makers so that they can see the threat in an actionable form, not just the form we have. And I think unclassified is one of those areas that we can come together. Again, GEOINT is one of the forerunners of that. But I think there are other areas where we need to be able to do it, and that's where instead of the government deciding what it prefers to produce, we could probably have some conversations about what that would need to be, and then figure out how we could all agree that needs to be produced. Because I don't think this is one of those things that is one-sided. But producing unclassified information that the people who receive it believe has standing enough to use, I think would be a useful thing for us to pursue.
Lots of discussion, I know this will be surprising, about artificial intelligence. The question here goes to the idea of how are we going to look at our tradecraft? How are we going to look at how we pursued our profession when we now have the ability to let the machines do some of the things, the mundane, the things they're good at? What does that mean to free up analysts from searching and allow them to be thinking?
I don't know, I'm going to make this up. We'll see if it's any good. Well, first of all, I was going to glibly say, I don't have to know because I gave that challenge to you. Bam. Talk amongst yourselves. So I think I'm pretty consistent on this. Remember what it is we do and the role that we fulfill. And that is, even though intelligence has an uncertainty to it, it has a truth to it as well. And so we're never going to be good if we're just people with opinion. And even though we're using lots more data, there's still a craft to understand both what that data show and the limitations of that data. So I think for us to find out forward, the first thing is to remember what it is we do for a living, and you're never going to be able to get enough to turn intelligence into an equation, so start with that. The second piece of that is we have to have confidence in it. The reason why we're so confident using the data we collect is because we know its provenance, and we know how to use it. Not only do we going to have to worry about the provenance of the data, and in a world that data can be manipulated, but the algorithms that are going to act on it, and the models that are going to underpin the use of those, all those things are going to have to be addressed in order for us to be able to have confidence in that kind of world that we do. So it's not just about the application of the technology, it's about knowing who we are and how that applies. My glib example is always, I would prefer Netflix to recommend the right movies to me, but I don't count on it. But that's not us in terms of how our data want to be used, particularly if machines are going to use the data that we have because they must, because humans aren't going to be able to faster. So the second piece is remember who we are and then apply to it. And the last thing I would say to all my leaders and those who are just beginning in this, when technology becomes a commodity, it is not what makes for strategic advantage. It's how you think about its use, and that is always going to be critical thinking and fundamental curiosity. So what's interesting about the arc of the world we're in right now, where we really want STEM, I would tell you the STEM people I really want who are also getting a liberal arts education, because how you think about it, the questions you ask, how you see it, how you understand the story, I think that's really where our play is going to be.
So this was the first question I got.
I'm trying to filibuster now because I'm looking down 116. I think I can only handle it.
No, you drew that one out. You totally
I did. Because I'm afraid it's always the last question that gets you.
But I've been holding this. This was
Okay,
the first one. And I think you'll see why I held it. Would you encourage Harper to follow your career path or chart a fundamentally different course?
If Harper... Wow. I got through so much without turning into the sap that you know I am. Just a sec. Because you're going to see why this is so hard for me. My mom and dad taught me that I was supposed to do my best and do something for the cause. That led me here. And I try and be worthy of their guidance every day. If Harper did that, knowing what I now know about how big the tent of national security is, she will be following in my footsteps, in their hopes, and in her life.
The Honorable Sue Gordon, ladies and gentlemen.